I'm with Salim Mansur, Professor Emeritus at University of Western Ontario, a frequent contributor to Just Right and Just Right Media. Hello, Salim.
Hi, good morning, Rob.
Now, there's something that's happened in the news just in the last day or two that has struck our attention, and that, of course, is the takeover of the Taliban in Afghanistan following the announced withdrawal of American troops by Biden back on May 1st, I believe. And I have to ask the question because, being a supporter of President Trump, who initiated the withdrawal of American troops from that country, was this inevitable? Was it inevitable that the Taliban were just waiting, whether it was Trump or Biden or whatever in administration, just waiting for the Americans to pull out so that they could just walk back in? Was it inevitable?
Quick answer is no. What we have witnessed in the last 24 hours, or maybe even in a larger timeline over the last week, and then this 72 hours before yesterday, that is August 15, Sunday, August 15, as we are talking on Monday morning, August 16th. There has been a stampede of Americans leaving Kabul, and there has been a blitzkrieg of the Taliban sweeping across Afghanistan in a matter of less than 3 weeks, and the takeover of Kabul, the capital, and all the major cities in Afghanistan. Remember or recall, I mean, we're living in a world in which 24 hours is a point of amnesia. 3 weeks ago, on July 21st or 22nd, at a Senate hearing, General Mark Milley, the chief of the Joint Staff, was giving an update on Afghanistan, among other things, and he said that there is no way that the Taliban is capable of taking Afghanistan.
It
So
reminded me, I saw a bit of that, it reminded me of Baghdad Bob, if you recall the Gulf War, when the bombs were just basically dropping on the middle of Iraq. Baghdad Bob was out there saying that everything's fine, the Americans are committing suicide outside the city and everything's great. So is this Biden administration just like in denial?
well, there it is. I mean, his chief military advisor, the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, saying that, everything is okay. I mean, and there will be withdrawal. The troop was being drawn down by the Biden administration. They announced it. They gave a timeline, and they said by September 1st they will be out of Afghanistan. So no, this was not inevitable. This was something which is part and parcel of the incoming Biden administration and Democratic policy. The optics everywhere is now comparing helicopters landing and taking off from the airport or from the US embassy in Kabul with pictures from Saigon in 1975. What is, again, I mean, those similarities, and we can get into it. But in Saigon, President Ford, a Republican president, came to office after Watergate, and it was a Democrat-controlled House and Senate that was not willing to provide the assistance to the South Vietnamese government, which led to the very rapid takeover of South Vietnam by the North Vietnamese army after they had basically made the agreement. That was the peace agreement they had made, that is Nixon administration had made in Paris. So without getting into too much history, there is commonality and difference. In this case, there has been a stampede. And this is not only about, Robert, the United States. This is about the entire Western powers the United Nations and the Western power. The Afghan operation began in October of 2001 in response to the September 11 terrorist attack. Again, this is all fading away from the memory. Here we are on the eve of the 20th anniversary of the attack on New York City and the takedown of the World Trade Center and the attack on the Pentagon in Washington by Al-Qaeda operative that was launched, planned, executed, and launched out of Afghanistan under the Taliban. And here it is on the 20th anniversary, just 3 weeks before the 20th anniversary, the Taliban is back and taken over, and the implications are vast. The operation in Afghanistan launched in 2001, and this has been the longest war of the West, and particularly the United States, 20 years operation, and the result is what we are witnessing, was done under UN resolution, chapter 7. Canada has been part and parcel of that. We have had 4 prime ministers, that is 4 regimes in Canada. In October of 2001, it was Jacques Chrétien was the prime minister. Then we had, Paul Martin as the prime minister. Then 10 years of Stephen Harper as the prime minister, and the past 6 years of Justin Trudeau as the prime minister. So we have had an investment in Afghanistan, Same with Britain, Germany, France. This is a slap across the face of the Western world, and of course on America particularly, given the leadership. So what are we to say at this point in time? What we can quickly say, what I can quickly say, is a catastrophic defeat with profound implications going forward, which has to be thought through, but there's nobody in Washington. Washington is on a holiday, as you know. White House is closed. I mean, we don't know where President Biden is, possibly in Camp David, trying to take his ice cream cone. But the serious matter is what is happening now is there is, of course, the local impact of the victory of the Taliban, the very rapid, swift movement that took over Kabul. There is a regional factor. It's going to have profound regional implication, both in the short term and in the long term. And there is a global implication of this that one has to think through very quickly. One of the global implications is that the United States can no longer provide the global leadership on anything when you're talking about free world and democracy. The conflict at this time in our history is a conflict between globalism, which is another word for Marxism, run out of the United Nations, the globalist agenda, which our prime minister has fully bought into, and the European Union has bought into. And in fact, one can say the Biden administration represents the globalist agenda, from the new Green Deal and withdrawal of the military forces and running down of the military forces, teaching the American general going out teaching, as Mark Miley has been doing, critical race theory instead of standing up to what the challenges now we are facing, the rise of China. In fact, it's no more the rise of China. It is China marching forward, given the sort of implosion that is taking place in the West. And we are watching it. And while the Taliban is now going to consolidate power and take its vengeance, we in the West, what are we doing? We are rapidly, basically abandoning all of the values that the West represents for an agenda in which the West is completely divided upon the issue.
And Salim, let me ask you a question.
Globalism and nationalism. And here we have a crisis of a proportion that tells us a number of things. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it was just while you were talking about communist China and Trudeau and Biden, there's no secret that Trudeau, Biden, that whole left wing are all globalists, all puppets of communist China to one degree or another, or at least they march to the tune of communist China. Afghanistan, as I understand it, shares a small border with communist China, and the communists are cozying up as we speak to the Taliban. This was reported by the Epoch Times yesterday, that they are opening negotiations with the Taliban. Oddly enough, because the communist Chinese are massacring the Uyghur Muslim population in their nation, and they're willing to talk to the Islamists in Afghanistan. Could there be some sort of communist Chinese directive which is basically telling Biden and the West to get out of this neighboring country of ours as soon as possible, regardless of the consequences?
Well, I mean, there is a whole lot of implication in terms of Biden's relationship with China. I mean, we all know in the sense, and nobody's going to do anything about it in Washington, that Biden has been bought and paid for by the Chinese. To what extent Biden is the Manchurian candidate in this instance, as in other instances we can point out, but in this instance, that the manner in which they have run out of Afghanistan, the American ambassador literally running to the Kabul airport, with the flag wrapped up and under his arm, to evacuate. It's simply a disgraceful manner in which, after 20 years of American, blood and money, treasury, so it is estimated around about $2.3 trillion was invested by the United States in Afghanistan. The number of dead in Afghanistan is close to 3,000 US troops dead and maimed and so on, apart from those Afghans who stood with America, which is basically a fraction of Afghanistan, but they stood with America, and they have been abandoned. And so, yes, I mean, is this a way in which the Biden administration, Joe Biden, has handed over Afghanistan to the Chinese? We will know in time. But from the Chinese point of view and from the Afghan point of view, it's the old saying, my enemy's enemy is my friend. This is the classic movement. The same thing applies to the Americans. I mean, they have made friends with the most horrible characters around the world. And here you have, when the Biden administration came to office or was installed in office, the issue is one of the first things that they did was to restore the alliance with Iran. With the current president, whose hand is, completely, immersed in blood. He was the executioner for Khomeini in 1979 when the Islamic Revolution took place in Iran and Khomeini came to power. So the signal of coming back with Iran and now pushing Iran and trying to restore the deal that the Obama administration, in which Biden was the vice president, signed with Iran, that is the nuclear deal, was back on the table, which is what Trump had torn and thrown away, and was putting pressure on Iran. So in Washington, the answer to the debacle in Afghanistan is going to be scapegoating. The opening question that you asked me, was this inevitable? So they will be engaged in scapegoating that all of this happened because of Trump. And that is simply another big lie that the corporate media, the mainstream media, including the Canadian media, is going to be talking for the next few weeks, because nobody here is willing to examine the situation, and nobody here is willing to take responsibility. And that's where we are in. But you flip over and let's go into Afghanistan. In a matter of less than 2 weeks, Mark Milley spoke at the end of July, the third week of July, assuring everybody in Washington that everything is okay. As you said, Baghdad Bob. In 2 weeks, Afghanistan, the Taliban just swept across the board. How did this happen? The inevitability of this is that the Americans and the Western powers built up a Potemkin nation building state. You know, there is no way that you can build up a Jeffersonian democracy in the Hindu Kush Mountains, in a society that is run in its own turn by its own culture and its own values, which is basically tribal values. I mean, the Taliban, the largest tribe in Afghanistan, the Pathan or the Pashtun, and the core of values is Pashtun Wali, which is tribal. So this is a local, huge victory. What it goes to show is to the Afghan people that their culture, their value, their tribal identity and loyalties and connections and kinships that have basically brought down previous empires. Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires, but in modern history it is true. It's the graveyard of empires. The British tried to take control of Afghanistan while Britain was ruling India for over 200 years. India was the crown jewel, the largest country that Britain ruled as a country, undivided India. And from India, they launched 3 Afghan wars, and they lost all 3 Afghan wars. The last Afghan war, only one straggling English troop who was not killed and mutilated after the defeat was allowed to go back over the Khyber Pass back into India to let the British know what had happened to the soldiers in Afghanistan or to their army in Afghanistan.
Is Afghanistan ungovernable in the Western sense of the word, since, as you mentioned, the Pashtun tribes, and there's something like 300 to 400 different tribes to the Pashtun ethnicity, which spans from Iran to Pakistan through Afghanistan, are they basically ungovernable? Isn't the last 200 years of history demonstrating that these Afghanis, particularly the Pashtun, are absolutely unwilling to have anybody come in who's a foreigner to their culture and their ethnicity, their ideas, and that they will fight to the last man to make sure that that whoever walks across their border doesn't stay very long, because history seems to point this out.
Well, I mean, it is ungovernable from the point of view of what the West tried to do without learning anything from their history, but it's not ungovernable from the point of view of the Afghan people. They have been living their life or their tribal structure. There are many tribes, but the dominant tribe are the Pashtun. They're approximately 50% of Afghanistan, and they have run their country or the tribes according to the code of value. It has nothing to do in the sense that you and I will accept those values. Why should we? I mean, we have our own values, but you cannot have an imposition from the top down. The lesson of Afghanistan, in the modern lesson of Afghanistan, Robert, is this is one geographical entity, bounded by boundaries that were calculated by the adjoining powers. I mean, the boundary that divides Afghanistan, the main boundary that divides Afghanistan or separates Afghanistan from Pakistan, modern day Pakistan, or what was British India, because Pakistan is a creation of Britain, the partition of 1947. August 15th was the 74th anniversary of the withdrawal of Britain from the subcontinent of India. That boundary is known as the Durand Line. The Durand Line was drawn in the 1870s, 1880s, and in that period by the British officer, Mr. Durand, to separate British India from what was Afghanistan after the defeats of the British, Similarly, the line that separates Afghanistan from Iran was drawn by the Iranians because there are overlapping tribes between Iran and Afghanistan. And on the north, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and a little bit of China. These were lines that were drawn by the Russian Empire, of which Uzbekistan was a part, Tajikistan was a part, and then with the collapse of the Soviet Union, these became independent states. So with this lines and boundaries that were drawn is the country Afghanistan. And the unique thing about Afghanistan, unique in a historical sense, is this part of what is Afghanistan that we see on the map is a virgin territory from the point of view no foreign power has been able to establish rule over there, going back 1,000 years, 1,000+ years, no foreign power established it. So the ultimate foreign power in that sense would have been the British. Britain ruled India for over 200 years, 250 years. It was British India. And Britain tried to, and Britain was defeated. So this is a country where there has been no impact of Western ideas, colonialism. I mean, India is today the world's largest democracy. Why is it the world's largest democracy? 250 years of British rule. None of that in Afghanistan. So there is no residual effect of Western ideas, Western notions of, freedom, democracy, gender rights, and so on and so forth that we take for granted. No, but we need to acknowledge they have their own system, their own values. So when 20 years ago we went there as the Americans soldiers have been speaking about it, They went there, they were told that the mission was being put out, that is the operation that, I forget now the code word for it, that was there in 2001 with the UN mandate, was as George Bush, 43, who was the president, was that to prevent another 9/11, we have to go and fight and destroy them from where it began so that it doesn't happen again in America. In that sense, it was quite logical. It was not about nation building or anything else. It was, Osama bin Laden was based in Afghanistan. The Afghans were asked, the Taliban government was asked. The Taliban had taken power in 1992. They were asked to hand over Osama bin Laden, and they said no. And so consequently, an operation was launched to get Osama. Osama bin Laden crossed over to Pakistan, and he hid in Pakistan till he was, assassinated in 2011 by Navy SEALs sent by the Obama administration. The point is, well, it was to take the revenge and to punish Afghanistan and to clean out the Taliban if necessary, that this will not happen again. But then that operation morphed into nation building. Many of us were skeptical about it. We supported the operation to take out Osama bin Laden, destroy Afghanistan as a base of the Islamist terror network. Now, fast forward 20 years later, who has won? It is the Taliban once again has won. So what it has proven locally, and I mean locally, not only within Afghanistan, Robert, they're tribal. Tribes that spills over across borders, so into Pakistan, most importantly, and then Iran, there is Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and so on and so forth. The message is very clear. The local message is very clear. The Taliban have proven, and their ideology, their Islamism, the Muslim Brotherhood connection, they have proven to their own people that they are the most resilient. And on the contrary, The greatest powers on the earth, of course, the United States joined together with the Western powers together, were driven out. They ran. After $2.3 trillion of investment, they ran. The Afghan president ran away. The vice president ran away. And the Potemkin army and the Potemkin nation building structure, after 20 years, simply melted. For the Afghan president to run away, he was run away because he knew exactly what would happen to him. It happened 20 plus years ago to his predecessor, who was the president under the Soviets. When the Soviets retreated in 1989 and the Taliban came out of the mountains, by the way, they had been armed by the Americans to fight the Soviet Union, and they defeated the Soviet Union, armed by the Americans, financed by the Americans. When they came out of the mountains, this man, his name was Muhammad Najibullah, who was the president of Afghanistan, a socialist republic. Their socialism was on the bayonet of the Soviet army. Jeffersonian democracy was on the bayonet of the American army. Look at the paradox. So this man, Najibullah, he tried to run. He couldn't run anywhere. He was trying to run into Pakistan. He was trying to run into India. He was unable to run because Kabul was surrounded. So he took refuge in a UN compound in Kabul with the UN flag flying, presumably that would be the international area. And he took refuge there. And the Taliban walked into the UN compound, dragged him out, tortured him, and hanged him in the main street of Kabul, along with his brother, and dragged his body and let it lie on the ground till they allowed the UN members to take the body and give it over to his tribal people, where he was given a burial. So the Potemkin nation building structure of Afghanistan with President Abdul Ghani, he knew what would happen to him. So he ran. And everybody else is running. I mean, it is a total chaos. So locally, they have proven themselves that they are the most resilient force.
What should they have done? What should the Biden administration, what should they have done to prevent this Taliban takeover, and especially the Taliban takeover of military equipment left by the Americans?
Absolutely, very good question, very relevant question. And it's not only about Afghanistan, it's about right across the Middle East and the Arab Muslim world, into Africa and into South Asia and Central Asia. The Biden administration, going back to the Obama administration, going back to the Democratic Party, has been in full Monty mode of appeasement. You cannot talk about Islamism because you're an Islamophobe if you talk about it. You can't talk about it. And in Canada, they declared, the Conservative Party declared me an Islamophobe and threw me out of the party. So if we cannot talk about it, if we cannot rationally discuss it, what policy will you have? So they were out into appeasement. President Trump, in the 4 years that he had, he was almost just at the tipping point of changing the entire dynamics of the Middle East, including Afghanistan. To just give you a very quick example, it was an America First policy globally. It was not only about the Middle East. So what it was, to demonstrate the vigor and the strength and the determination of America to take on anybody who is going to challenge America. So he built up the American armed forces that had been let down by the Obama administration, and it was to demonstrate with the force buildup that this is about America and America's power and America's position, and America will defend the interests and the interests of its allies. and maintain order in the world, on the Pacific region, in the Middle East, in the Atlantic basin. He reinvigorated the NATO, and so on and so forth. And then what did he do? He opened up negotiation. He opened up negotiation with North Korea. Everybody said, what is this madness? You know, but before he opened the negotiation, what did he do? He sent the American naval fleet. He said, if you're going to launch missile, I have a bigger button. The message was very clear. I will smash your head and, turn you into a parking lot. However, that's not what we're interested to do. What is your problem, Kim Il-jong? Let's sit and talk. And he went and met Kim Il-jong twice. It's possible that in his second term, he would have had a peace deal and he would have solved the problem of South Korea. Similarly, and more importantly, in the Middle East, he was doing that. And what was the result? In the last year of his office, the Abraham Accords were being signed. The Gulf states were making deals with Israel, recognize Israel, Bahrain, UAE, Sudan, Morocco, and Saudi Arabia was just on the verge of making that final step, that is to sign the agreement with Israel, turning the page. And how did he prepare for that? He prepared for that by smashing ISIS. He didn't talk about it. He didn't negotiate. He smashed the ISIS, and the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he was found in his, rabbit hole, and he was disposed of. He did the same thing with General Soleimani, where there was a hue and cry, remember? And he took off. General Soleimani was the head of the Iranian Quds Force, which was basically the Iranian arm of promoting the Iranian terror network across the Middle East. It was the Iranians who were dealing, and it was Soleimani who was the commanding officer who was doing the IEDs in Iraq, also in Afghanistan, the improvised explosive devices that took the lives of so many American soldiers in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and they were bold and they were challenging him. Well, Trump took him out. The message was very clear. He tore up the JCPOA, the deal that Obama had signed with Iran, and was basically squeezing Iran through sanction and encirclement of military. So it was carrot and stick, and he was not going to hesitate about using the stick in a massive way if on the other side, after they had made the deal, they were going to break the deal. So when President Trump in 2020, it was in 2019, 2020, talked about getting the Taliban on the table, it was carrot and stick. He was going to, he was in the process of incrementally withdrawing, taking down the footstep of America from this part of the world. I mean, he had talked about in his campaign in 2015, 2016, of this endless war that had cost American treasury and American blood immensely with no gain to show. Just think about it. From Vietnam to Afghanistan, from the 1960s to right now, where you and I are speaking, 24 hours after the fall of Kabul, this immense American investment in its army, navy, air force, 40% of the world expenditure on military weapon is one country, that's United States of America. But what do they have to show? They had not won one single war. They lost in Vietnam. And with that came the implication of the killing fields of Cambodia, Khmer Rouge, on and on and on, And in Middle East, endless war and no conclusion. 4 presidents after Ronald Reagan, who called about Mr. Gorbachev tear down the wall. You've had George Bush 41 till Obama. The Congress passed the law that the American embassy should be in the capital of Israel, Jerusalem. And none of the presidents followed the law. They all talked about it, but nobody moved the embassy. Trump came, he said he's going to do it, he did it. Everybody, the entire mainstream media, the corporate media, the UN, the EU, everyone said the streets of Arab world, Muslim world will be enraged. People will be, walking and burning American flags and so on and so forth. It was just the reverse. It was a beginning of a massive transition taking place in the Middle East. Iran was isolated. Israel was making relationship with the Arab countries. And the last major country is Saudi Arabia. In my view, Saudi Arabia already has a relationship which is below the radar, that development is taking place. And now with the fall of Afghanistan, that will become even more rapid, but for the Biden administration. So I, for one moment, do not buy the scapegoating answer, because the deal would have been that you, Taliban, you want a role in the government, you will have a role in the government, but you have to maintain the agreement, it will be a transition. Look at it. What has happened in Afghanistan has not happened in Iraq. In Iraq, the Iraqi government that was established after the removal of Saddam Hussein has incrementally grown. And it is responsible now for Iraq. I mean, there is influence of Iran over there, but there is influence of other countries over there. And the Iraqi government, the state of Iraq post Saddam Hussein, is holding. In other words, the process of representative government is slowly taking shape. And it is taking shape with no American troop withdrawal in a manner in which the withdrawal took place in Afghanistan under the Obama regime. Signaling and pulling the plug and walking away.
If you think about it, Salim, after the Second World War, the United States and the Allied countries had a military presence in Japan to this day, in Germany, only now slowly getting back after almost 80 years, to keep those jingoistic countries at bay. It took generations of American and Allied influence. I mean, the Americans wrote the Japanese Constitution, have a naval base to this day in Yokosuka, Japan, because they were belligerents. Not unlike the Afghanis of today, in not to the degree, of course, but maybe it takes a permanent presence of, shall I say, civilized nations to occupy countries like Afghanistan for, if it's 1,000 years, it's 1,000 years. However long it takes to change a culture to one of peace. What would you think of that?
Well, very quick example. I mean, the Japan issue, or for that matter, you can say the German issue model keeps coming back, and that was the argument that was made in terms of nation building by the neocons, that is George Bush and company. And those who were skeptical about this were skeptical for very good reason. Look, Afghanistan has no marker to be put forward in terms of comparison with Japan. Japan was a modern state, just as Germany is a modern state. Modern in the sense they had internally modernized. Japan was a highly industrialized country before World War II. And that had begun in the 19th century under Japanese rule. Japan was a closed society, and the Japanese decided, the emperor and the samurais and the ruling class decided what is called the Meiji Revolution in the middle of the 19th century to rapidly industrialize. In 1905, but the process had begun. In 1905, the Japanese defeated the Russian Navy, Russian land forces in the famous battle in 1905, the Battle of Tsushima. What it goes to say that by the beginning of the 20th century, Japan was already an industrial power in the Pacific region, in Eastern Pacific. Germany was an industrial power, you know. So the defeat of the Second World War was the defeat of an industrial power that was aiming to become a dominant power. Germany in Europe, Japan in East Asia, you know, the co-prosperity theory. And it tangled with the Americans, and there was a war, and the Americans fought that war, defeated Japan, and mark you, the rapid transition of Japan to accept American dominance was punctuated by Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is the month, right? We are speaking. Only, you know, August 6th was Hiroshima, August 9th was Nagasaki. The punctuation of the two atomic bombs clarified everything else. And so Japan accepted it willingly. The emperor was left untouched. He was not dragged to the Tokyo trial. He was left untouched. That means the Japanese culture was not tampered with. The constitution was written and handed down, and Japanese gladly accepted it, and the rest is history. Japan became not only a peaceful power, but it became an economic giant within a generation after the end of the war. So that's not the story of Afghanistan. Even Iraq, you know, with the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, there was an internal fight. There was almost a decade-long fight, Shia, Sunni, the Kurds, but slowly they came together because there was, Iraq is a center of the Islamic civilization going back to the 7th, 8th century, you know. And so the end goal of trying to have a political order based upon values, even those values will be translated into local conditions. Nobody can just simply buy Jeffersonian democracy from Washington and bring it to whether South Africa or Iraq or Afghanistan, you know. That's not it will go through local translation and people have to take it over, just as what happened in India, you know. Magna Carta was not imported into India, but the system of the government that evolved through Magna Carta into the parliamentary system, and Britain is the mother of parliaments, was brought to India and adapted to the Indian condition. And there it is, you know, I mean, 75 years later, India is still the world's largest functioning democracy. And the Indians, like me, speak English and dream about Shakespeare. But there was nothing comparable in Afghanistan except for that very thin layer of westernized Afghans. You have seen the pictures from the 1960s of women going out in skirts and, you know, bobbed hair, and men possibly singing, you know, Rolling Stone and Beatles song. But that is the thin crust. Beneath the thin crust, this is the urban center. This is only in Kabul and the Kabul University. This was that passing decade in the immediate years after the Second World War, when America was truly confident of its position, and so was the Soviet Union confident of its position, and Afghanistan was in the center of that, and there was an Afghan ruling class, the king of Afghanistan, I mean, a dynasty, and that dynasty was overthrown, and that's an internal Afghan story. But that thin crust was there, but that thin crust collapsed. It could not, you know, create the forces in the process of modernity, to penetrate through the tribal culture of Afghanistan.
What do you predict for the future with this Taliban takeover, Salim? Can we anticipate another chapter of fomenting terrorism, or do you think maybe there'll be a lull where they'll just sit back and, you know, get their forces together maybe for a decade or so and then flex their muscle again?
Well, in the short term, what has happened is there is a open and unstated war this for a long time with you, and 9/11 2 billion people, and the gradual coming together of making that immense transition. Transition is in the mind at the end of the day, modernity is in the mind, and so that transition is taking place in the Muslim world. And the counterforce to that is Islamism, Muslim Brotherhood, Jamaat-e-Islami, the Taliban. In the Middle East, that counterforce is today represented by that alliance of Muslim Brotherhood, Iran. Middle East is divided in that line. The Muslim Brotherhood is rapidly and ferociously being put down by Arab and Muslim governments. In Egypt, they elected, Muslim Brotherhood elected Mohammed Morsi. 2 years later, he was overthrown and put into prison, and Muslim Brotherhood declared a terrorist organization, and the Egyptian government has gone after them, But it takes time. In Tunisia, this is happening right now. They have gone after the Muslim Brotherhood. They overthrew the government. There's a military government now. Same thing is happening in the Gulf states, or they have banned the Muslim Brotherhood. They've declared them to be a terrorist organization, etc. But Muslim Brotherhood has a presence, just as the communists has a presence. It's an ideological movement. The conflation of ideology with a religious belief system is what is their advantage. They have conflated the two, and they're using that as a weapon against modernity. And the forces, the Muslims who are seeking to develop in a political and cultural terms the values of a democratic representative governments, are in some sense handicapped, because they have to fight the Muslim Brotherhood and that ideology, and yet they have to maintain their own religious value system, So countries like Bangladesh, Indonesia, Malaysia, in the Middle East, you have a number of countries in Central Asia, they have gone after the Muslim Brotherhood or their local variation. The irony is the Muslim Brotherhood is now ensconced in the West, in the Congress, in the Parliament, in Canada, in European society, in Britain, in Germany, in France. I mean, this is now the bizarre situation. The Islamist ideology is now far stronger and operative in the political sense in the West, not in the Muslim world. However, this victory of the Taliban brings Afghanistan back into it, because Muslim Brotherhood needs territory and their ideology needs to be expressed territorially. So Afghanistan is a huge victory for the Muslim Brotherhood, because the Taliban is fully supported and financed by the Muslim Brotherhood. In the Arab world, the Muslim Brotherhood now is supported by two governments. One is Qatar, and Qatar is on the Persian Gulf, is an Arab state. It is joined to Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, they're going after the Muslim Brotherhood, but in Qatar, it is Muslim Brotherhood and scones. The ruler of the Taliban, the chief of the Taliban, was based in Qatar all this time, Doha. And now he's flying back to Kabul, So this is a huge victory for the Qataris and for the Iranians. Few months ago, Robert, April, May of this year, the big story for the Persian Gulf region was that the Iranian Navy was challenging commercial shipping, which is basically oil tankers, going through the Strait. You may just look at the map. The Strait of Hormuz is the choke point on the Persian Gulf. 70 to 75% of the oil tanker traffic in the world goes through the Strait of Hormuz. Throughout the 10 years of Iran-Iraq war, when President Reagan was the president, the Iranians tried to cut off that choke point, and the Americans kept it open. This time, under Biden, there has been no response. So now if you want to connect the dot, you can see very quickly that the Iranians who have basically supported the Taliban, have been their backstop, have provided them with the equipment, the big guns, the big ammunition, in this blitzkrieg that happened. Iran had been a huge factor, a huge actor in this operation. They tested the Biden administration. They saw that the Biden administration was back again into Obama administration of making an apology to the Muslim world, that is, to the Muslim Brotherhood. They had restored the nuclear deal with Iran, that they were not going to challenge Iran on the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranians were flexing their muscle. And that flexing of the muscle led to the rapid movement of the Taliban. They made pincer movements. They saw that there was no resistance, and then boom, it just followed through. So this is a huge victory for Iran, with implications on the Persian Gulf region that has to be thought through. And in terms of the Arab-Israeli conflict, while the Arab states have been making, peace agreements with Israel, you have now the Muslim Brotherhood and Iran stepping up the counterattack, support for the Palestinian, and opposition to Iran. That will be the rallying call in support of the Taliban in Afghanistan. Okay, but there's another dimension, even far more perilous, and that is the spillover of the Afghan victory into Pakistan, because the Taliban are in Pakistan. The tribal overlap from the Durand line into Pakistan is huge, and the Afghan Taliban had taken refuge in Pakistan during the war of the Soviet Union, and then with the American operation after 9/11. These Taliban in Pakistan is going to be immensely energized, and they're going to challenge the administration in Pakistan. And why Pakistan is so important? Because it is only within the range of the Taliban gunfire is the capital of Pakistan and the whole nuclear operation. Pakistan is a nuclear state. One of the reasons why the Americans wanted to remain or have a force in Afghanistan, a stopgap force in Afghanistan, and President Trump was going to leave behind a force in Afghanistan and a force in Pakistan, is to safeguard that the nuclear system of Pakistan doesn't fall into the wrong hands, especially the Taliban.
So we have... Sorry, Salim?
I say, and now that is an open question,
Right.
I mean, the danger, it is a huge question. And finally, about the Chinese has won a big victory. It is not about the Chinese and the Taliban have ideological issues here. It is about strategic issue. The China's road and belt strategy that has been going on for the last 20 years, now has opened up Afghanistan, and that's the deal that the Chinese and the Taliban are going to make for their more mutual interests, that the minerals in Afghanistan plus the traffic through Afghanistan to the Persian Gulf will now become much more accessible to the Chinese. And that's what the Chinese is going to push. China has relationship with Iran, because Iran is, again, and my enemy's enemy is my friend. Iran's opposition to United States, the Khomeini regime, and same with China, and China's need for oil. So to the Persian Gulf and through Afghanistan, that thing will be consolidated. And there's already a relationship through Pakistan. So China has made a huge gain in this matter, And you can see the Chinese and the Russian embassy and their diplomats have not run from Afghanistan. They're very much there, So what does it say? The Taliban understand, just like anybody understand, what Osama bin Laden talked about, the strong horse, the strong man. America is no longer the strong horse or the strong man.
A shame.
And this collapse of Kabul, of the American presence in Kabul, ricochets around the region and globally that America is no more a strong horse that can be trusted.
We'll leave it there. Thank you, Salim, as always.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this presentation, visit justrightmedia.org for more programming that's not right-wing, it's just right.